that on, Brian? All righty, well, good morning. It's good to see everybody out this morning. Got a little bit bigger crowd than we had last Sunday. A little bigger crowd, a lot less snow and ice. So, hope everybody had a good week and stayed safe. I know some of the travels were a little iffy this week. Brian, if you don't mind putting the first slide up there. We'll start off with this here in just a minute. Before we get into our class, we'll open up with a prayer. I'm not going to necessarily go through the announcements now, but is there anybody who's specifically in need, knows of anyone specifically in need of prayer this morning? I know Donald sent out the text about Jim having ankle surgery tomorrow, so we'll keep him in our prayers. But anybody else we need to mention specifically this morning? Is it your cousin? They're not, your brother and sister aren't? Okay. Okay. So that's your brother and sister? Okay. Sorry. Oh, okay. So Jerry's brother, sister, and cousin. And then Jim's in his surgery tomorrow. Anybody else need to mention? Esteban, would you mind starting us with an opening prayer? Thank you.
Dear Lord, thank you for this new day of life and health. Thank you for the opportunity you give us to be here and you give us the want to be here. Thank you for getting us here safely. Thank you for the people who are cleaning the roads. I ask you to be with Jen as he's going to have surgery. Also be with supporting relatives. I couldn't hear their exact name or need, but you know what their needs are, Lord. Please be with them. And thank you for the Hornets for being a good example to us of always being dedicated to you, Lord. I ask you to be with us in this class as we're about to learn more about integrity, open our hearts and our minds to be able to absorb your word, and through Steve, learn a little bit more about it. Thank you for using Steve as one of your instruments to be able to teach your word and help us to understand it a little better, but more importantly, allow us to learn from it and take it out into this world who is slowly getting away from you, and allow us to be lights to shine in other people, and allow us to continue to be that salt out there. Thank you for all that you do. In your son Jesus' name.
Amen. Thank you, Esteban. Appreciate it. So I wanted to go through this quarter, the AM adult class, which we're in right now, obviously. The education committee decided that we wanted to ask men to sign up to teach different lessons. Kind of the theme, as you can see here, of this quarter is going to be characteristics of the child of God. And we had 13 different characteristics, definitely not an all-encompassing list of the characteristics of a child of God, but some of the main ones are the commonly thought of characteristics. And we asked the men to sign up for one. Some guys are doing two different topics, and teach those individually throughout the quarter. So this is a list of the characteristics. Ben started us off last week and did a great job speaking on honesty. And then you can see the rest of the list. That is pretty well in order. I didn't put the dates for each man up there because there could be some moving around or adjusting of those dates due to schedules and whatnot. But today, as Esteban mentioned in his prayer, we're going to be discussing integrity and how that relates to children of God and how that's an important aspect of following God and living a life pleasing to Him. Trace will have one on responsibility, so that's probably a good one to skip. No, I'm just kidding. Discipline will be Zach, strength Jimmy, confidence Dennis, respect Cody, growth is Esteban, courage will be Mark, gratitude Aaron, charity Zach, mercy Lane, and kindness will be by Ben. So we're looking forward to those topics. There is this schedule with the dates is on the back bulletin board, so if you want to kind of be prepared for what our AM class will be, each each week. Feel free to check that list out, talk with the teacher, see maybe what their angle they're planning on looking at it, so you can be more prepared for the class. I think any one of our teachers would be thrilled to discuss that with you, so you could be that much more prepared and probably get that much more out of the class. So just wanted to explain that and let you guys know kind of what the plan is for this quarter in this class, and hopefully build your excitement or anticipation for the classes to come. All right, next slide. Integrity. When you hear the word integrity, what do you think of? What does that mean to you, or what's an example of when you feel integrity has been demonstrated? Okay. Doing the right thing when nobody's looking. Yep, definitely heard that before.
I think being a person of your word.
Okay. Trust. Yes. Very good. Yep.
Steve,
Yes.
this is a little bit of computer technical jargon, but things, in a video game, there is I remember the term used as structural integrity, and that's also used in
Okay.
the outside world. But it's basically how well something holds up.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. So under pressure, how strong is it going to be? Can it withstand? Yeah, that's good. Those are all very good definitions. Dictionary definition, kind of summed up, is quality of being honest and having strong moral principles or moral uprightness. To Esteban's point, doing the right thing when no one is looking. Can we go to the next slide? August 1st, 2001, integrity, the word integrity and what integrity meant to me changed drastically. That's the day I entered boot camp, and how that went when we first got there was we left St. Louis with a group of people who were going to basic training. So we flew out, we went to Lambert, we all flew down to San Antonio, and we were instructed as soon as we got off the plane, we were to report to this specific part of the airport, and where we were greeted very warmly. And that's a joke. We were handed a pamphlet very similar to this newer, or it was an older one than that, but that's the best version of it I could find, and told to sit down Indian style in a long straight line while we waited for everybody else's flights to get in. We're given this pamphlet, told to open it, read it, and that's all we could do. Okay. Inside this pamphlet were the Air Force core values, which are integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. Integrity first. That was driven into our head every day, multiple times for the next several weeks. But this is where it was introduced to us. And from that point on, that's one of the reasons I picked this topic. Integrity has been something that's very important to me and brings back a lot of memories from this. Can we go to the next slide, Brian? So I want to read two stories that I think demonstrate integrity in a great way. I'm going to share those with you now. I'm going to read them off here. So, one is about Easy Eddie. Don't know if anybody's familiar with him, but he was Al Capone's attorney. Al Capone owned virtually all of Chicago in the 1920s. He had a net worth of more than $1 billion and which was funded by organized crime, including murder, prostitution, and bootlegging. Capone's lawyer, nicknamed Easy Eddie, promoted Capone's continued dominance. Easy Eddie's skills kept Al Capone out of prison sentences that Capone deserved. Capone showered Easy Eddie in excess of keeping him out of jail. Easy Eddie had every luxury available. Easy Eddie's estate filled an entire city block. Eddie ignored being awash in evil because of the lifestyle it afforded. His heart was hard, except for Eddie's one soft spot, which was his son. He wanted his son to have every advantage that Eddie didn't have while growing up. Despite everything he had was the fruit of crime, Eddie attempted to teach his son morals. Eddie wanted his son to be a more honorable man than Eddie. But with all of this influence and wealth, there were two things Eddie couldn't pass on to his son: his example and good name. Eddie was faced with the question, what good is it for a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? That question provoked Eddie. He began to change. Easy Eddie chose to make his wrongs right. Eddie tried to clean up his name by telling the police the truth about Al Capone. That required Easy Eddie to witness against Capone and his organized crime syndicate. Eddie testified, and within a year, the mob murdered Easy Eddie. He died after a tremendous flash of gunfire on a desolate Chicago street, but his life was not in vain. He had given riches to his son worth more than an estate. Eddie gave him integrity. And if you see on the top right, that's a picture of his car after they had shot him up and he crashed. And then the next story is a story of Butch O'Hare. World War II revealed many heroes. One was a fighter pilot named Butch O'Hare. His story started after he was airborne with the rest of his squadron. Butch looked at his fuel gauge and to his surprise saw that the ground crew had not refilled his fuel tank. So Butch would not have enough fuel to complete the mission and return to the aircraft carrier. Butch's commander ordered him to return to the ship immediately. He did so grudgingly. As he returned, he saw a sight that turned his blood cold. An enemy squadron, let's see, I lost my spot. Sorry. This really kills the story. I'll lose my spot. I'll just start from here. So Butch would not have enough fuel to complete the mission and return the aircraft carrier. Butch's commander ordered Butch to return to the ship immediately. He did so grudgingly. As Butch returned, he saw a sight that turned his blood cold. An enemy squadron was racing to the American ships. With the entire division on a mission, it left the whole American fleet defenseless. Butch had no chance to bring back his squadron, and he couldn't warn the fleet of impending peril. So Butch decided there was only one thing he could do: divert the enemy from the fleet. Ignoring his safety, he plunged into the Japanese formation, firing his guns as he stunned enemy planes. Japanese airplanes fired on him from all angles with their fierce machine guns and cannons. Butch kept moving. After the winged guns emptied all the ammunition, Butch drove his aircraft towards the enemy aircraft, attempting to clip an enemy wing and send them down in a spiral. Ultimately, the shocked and stunned Japanese squadron changed directions. Butch O'Hare returned to the carrier. Once he landed, Butch told of his adventure, and the movie from Butch's gun camera showed the tale. Butch shot down 5 Japanese aircraft. Butch was the Navy's first flying ace of World War II. He was the first naval aviator to win the Congressional Medal of Honor. Butch was killed a year later at 29. And Chicago Airport is now named in his honor. The interesting part about these two stories, and one of the reasons I picked these two as an example, is this last part. These two stories have a commonality. Butch O'Hare was Easy Eddie's son. Easy Eddie didn't just give Butch the lesson of integrity, he gave him a good name. That's the way integrity works. Eddie understood that he had to show Butch the truth instead of talking about it. Honesty is what you say, integrity is how you show it. It is action-oriented, not word-oriented. Eddie showed integrity despite the probable outcome of death. That integrity inspired his son to do the same. I think we'd all agree both those men, Easy Eddie and Butch O'Hare, demonstrated great integrity. What specific actions would you highlight or identify that allowed them to claim that title of showing integrity? What about those actions demonstrated integrity? What about Easy Eddie's actions or Butch's actions demonstrated integrity.
Butch was selfless.
Yeah. Both of them.
Yeah.
I mean, Eddie knew by speaking out against what Capone and his people were doing was gonna cost him his life. That's how they operated. Anybody who spoke on that, they killed him. I mean, that's how they operate. And he knew what it was going to cost him to do the right thing, but he did it anyways.
We sure going to be making the connection, with Christ. He knew that he was going to be, killed, but he still went forth and did what he was supposed to, just like he knew his outcome.
You just killed my point, Dennis. I appreciate it. No, I'm just kidding. He's way ahead of me here. But yeah, exactly. So they chose the tougher route. They chose a route that cost them but benefited others. And like Dennis pointed out, Jesus is the prime example. No greater example of integrity do we have than Jesus. This morning, for the remainder of our time, I want to look at some examples in Jesus' life where he demonstrated integrity and hopefully encourage us to share in those qualities of integrity. We're going to start by looking in Luke chapter 22. We'll go to, yep. Brian's ahead of me with the slides. Dennis is ahead of me in my notes. Everybody's on the ball this morning. Luke 22, and we'll read verses 41 through 44. Would somebody like to read that for us? Luke 22, 41 through 44.
And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw, and he kept down and prayed, saying, Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthened him, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground.
Is Jesus demonstrating integrity here? Yeah. How so? How is Jesus demonstrating integrity here? I agree with you 100%. But
He already does. It says it in the text. In 44, his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down. The amount of anxiety that brings, and then to still go out and say, if it's your will, let it be done.
Yes.
Go ahead. No, I was saying the point, so you're good.
He asks in verse 42 the Father to take away all this, and as far as the cup, it's not like a literal cup, but it's just everything going on, all of the agony and everything. And he's take this away, but then he said, not my will, but yours be done. So he knew that he had to do it in order for me and you to be saved or to have eternal life.
yeah. The passage makes it clear he's suffering, right? It says he's in agony. And part of that agony comes, Jesus knew what he was going to suffer. Not only was it prophesied, and we know Jesus was very familiar with Scripture, but crucifixions were common in the Roman Empire. I tried to research that. One source estimated there were 1,000, the Romans crucified 1,000 people a year. Tried to double check that. Another source said it would be impossible to come up with that number, but also agreed that it would be commonplace. And Dan did such a good job this past Wednesday night in his class on Mark, detailing the gruesomeness of the crucifixion. And I think there's a very good chance that Jesus had witnessed those with his own eyes. Jesus had witnessed what he would eventually suffer. And to think about watching that or in contemplating, this is going to happen to me, having the very true and honest reaction of, I don't want that to happen to me, but to love each and every one of us enough to say, go ahead and do it to him. That's powerful.
We have to ask ourselves, will we be willing to do the same thing?
Yeah. I mean, we answer that question every day, you know. We want to say, yeah, I'd die for Jesus, but I'm not willing to sacrifice a TV show to study his word. Right? Well, I don't think it's fair to say we're willing to give up everything for him if we're not willing to give up 30 minutes of our time for him. And I'm not saying watching a TV show is bad. It's fine to do that. But it's just to drive home a point. We'll say we will, you know, make this gigantic sacrifice for him, but are we willing to sacrifice the little things? I don't know. If we're not willing to sacrifice the little things, I guarantee you we're not willing to sacrifice the big things. Let's see here. The passage tells us of Jesus was in agony. Agony, another way to put it, is extreme suffering. And like we said and talked about already, he chose to endure it for us. You know, it's so easy whenever we're in pain or in trials or hard times to throw in the towel, right? It's one thing, like we just talked about, to say, yeah, I would sacrifice my life for Jesus. It's easy to say that here when it's not in jeopardy, or it's not that threat's not posed to us. But how do we respond to adversity? Are we willing to stay committed, show that integrity during the tough times? That's something we all have to answer ourselves. But that's what integrity looks like. We're looking at these examples to examine and better understand what integrity truly entails. And that's what integrity looks like. Doing something that benefits others but costs ourselves. Would you agree we can demonstrate integrity in much smaller circumstances, but still in a loving and sacrificing way? Maybe by secretly giving of your own means to help someone who's in need. Sacrificing more of our free time than someone requests because we see the need for that in their life. Several other ways, small ways, in comparison to what Jesus gave up, that we can show integrity and show that we are willing to sacrifice for others' benefit rather than our own. The next point, Brian, we can go to the next slide. Our motivations. We can demonstrate integrity in keeping our motivations pure. Doing things for the right reason. Jesus instructs us in Matthew 5:8 in the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes. He says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Paul echoes this thought and teaching in 1 Corinthians 10:24 through verse 24 through 30. If you would flip over there with me. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 24 through 30. Yep, chapter 10, verses 24 through 30. Would anybody like to read that for us this morning? Thank you.
Let no one seek his own, but each of the one other's well-being. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market, asking no questions for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. If any of those who do not believe invites you to dinner, and you desire to go, eat whatever is set before you, asking no question for conscience sake. But if
So the passages I want to highlight here from this passage, thanks Dennis for reading that, are the bookend verses in that passage, the first 24 and verse 30. Paul's reminding us here that we're to seek the good of our neighbor for the reason of glorifying God or bringing glory to his name. You know, there's several wrong reasons we might help somebody. Maybe so we'll feel like they'll help us in return. So we can be seen by men, and they can, you know, give us credit for doing that. Maybe so they will owe us one or owe us a favor. But Paul reminds us in this passage that if our reason for helping someone or doing any act is for any other reason than to glorify God or to bring glory to God, our motives are not what they need to be. We saw Jesus demonstrated this trait in the passage we read earlier in Luke when he was in the garden, but we also see it in several other times in Scripture. John 4, just after Jesus meets the Samaritan woman at the well, his disciples were encouraging Jesus to eat because he needed his strength. But let's look at Jesus' response here in John chapter 4, just in verse 34, and I'll read that real quick. John 4, verse 34. Again, this is in the context we just set out. Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work." What is food? What does food do for us? Yeah. Have to have it. Sustains us, right? Yes, Ben.
Well, I was just going to say, I see the word motivation up on the big screen. I think we have to be really careful as to what motivates us, in life. And I think a lot of times, maybe when we're starting to get on the right track, we can misjudge our own conceptions, and maybe be motivated in mysterious ways or just the wrong way, period. And it's, I see where that now, where it's intertwined with integrity, like the lesson.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's definitely something we have to keep a constant gauge on. Are our motivations for doing things for the right reason? Right? Is it so I'm glorified, or is it so God is glorified? And that's what we're going to look at here a little bit with this example and from Jesus. So like we just said, and Joni mentioned, food is, we have to have food. Food sustains us. It keeps us going. And that's what Jesus calls doing God's will, his food. That's what sustains him. That's what keeps him going, is doing God's will. I hope one day I can say I've attained that attitude. But I think that's something that we're constantly going to have to strive for, right? To want to do God's will as much as I want food. Right. Jesus echoes this point just a couple chapters later, chapter 6, verse 38. He says, "For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me." Jesus again makes it clear that his motives are pure. And it's easy to say that. We need to have pure motives. How do we accomplish it? How do we ensure that our motives are for the right reason, are for glorifying God and not to glorify me or to glorify something other than God? Any ideas? Yes, Ben?
We have to make sure that our heart
Yep.
You know, if we're like conceited or self-absorbed, you know, those will lead to the wrong motivations.
Yeah. It's interesting you start there, because that's kind of where my thought process went as well when I was trying to think about how can we work on having a pure heart. Like I said, it's easy to say we need one, or say we do, but how do we accomplish that? I don't know. Yes, go ahead.
One thing I was thinking was, one thing we talk about a lot is giving out of the point of sacrifice instead of out of abundance.
Okay.
And so some of us, let's just say you're going to give up your resources or whatever the case may be, giving out of point of sacrifice, literally where you're giving up something you want
Okay.
to help somebody else. When you're giving out of point of sacrifice, even if it's not at first, eventually that's going to weigh on your heart. Like you're doing, and it's going to help you with the motivation for the right reasons, and not just, you know, it's off the top. It's not really that big
Right.
a deal. It's not going to affect my life. It's not going to change who I am or what I'm going to do with my family. But if you're sacrificing, truly sacrificing, where you have to give up something you want, that helps change your heart over time, even if it doesn't at first.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think we also see that the blessings for that type of giving are so much greater as well. So yeah, great point. Anybody else? Yes.
So, I mean, with social media and everything nowadays, a lot of things that we do, like personally throughout the day, you see a lot of people bringing it up on there saying, oh, I did this for
Mhm.
this person,
Mm-hmm.
or I did this, almost like bragging.
Yeah.
I think that is a negative motivation in your heart if you're having to brag about something in order to receive, hey, good job.
Sure.
Doing that.
Absolutely. And that gets back to our motives. You know, if we're putting it out there maybe just to let it be known that maybe this person needs help, then okay. But yeah, you're exactly right. If you're putting that out there so people can say, oh, you're such a great person or whatever, we're missing the boat, right? Total great point. Yes. Anybody else?
When you're in God's Word and you read about the faithfulness of His people throughout the ages, that makes fresh on your mind, and
Yeah.
that makes you think, hey, I want to go sin, I want
Yeah.
my motivation to be good.
Right. Yes. All very good points. Thank you. Getting back to applying or working towards the pure heart, I was thinking back, I think it's been a few years ago, we did a class in here on Wednesday nights on the Beatitudes. And we looked at it almost in like a pyramid format, or like a building block, starting in verse 3, Matthew 5:3, blessed are the poor in spirit, or the humble. And that humility is towards God, and recognizing the need for God in our lives is the base of that. And as we work up into verse 8, to have that pure heart. And kind of the building blocks that you see there in the Beatitudes, the poor in spirit, or the humility, the recognition of the need for God. You know, the beginning of knowledge is the fear of God, right? Verse 4, blessed are those who mourn, those who recognize that they have sinned, separated themselves from God, and mourn over the results of that. Mourn over their choices of sin and going against God's will. The third one, verse 5, those who are gentle, right? Those who are gentle or meek in their dealings with others, right? And care about other people. Verse 6, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, those who crave the right thing, right? I don't know about you, there's been numerous times this morning I was craving something to eat. That is what I wanted to do. When's the last time we can say we craved doing the right thing? craved, our full desire was on doing what was right. That's what this passage is talking about. Hungering for righteousness, hungering for God's way, hungering to do His will. 7, the merciful, being mercy, showing mercy, recognizing the overwhelming mercy that has been shown to us and wanting to reflect that to others. Doing all those things are building blocks to accomplishing verse 8 and being pure in heart. And having those pure motives to truly desire to be obedient to God for the right reasons. Be obedient to God, not to bring attention to myself, not for any other reason, but to bring glory to God and please Him. That's just some thoughts I have. That's not the concrete right answer by any means, but I feel like that's a one way to approach it, to build on having that pure heart in our life. Any other ideas or suggestions?
Since we're on with the attitudes,
I thought you were going to go to my next point. I'm kidding.
When I was at Arnold, it was in the young adults class. We kind of drove home the Beatitudes. And if you live Matthew 5, 3 through 9, 10, you will inherit. If you're doing those things, you will be walking with Jesus. And I think that's, we kind of gloss over it, sometimes, but really look at those and practice it.
Yep. It's Jesus' first recorded sermon, and for Him to start off with the basics or the building blocks of Christianity makes a lot of sense. Yeah. A lot there in those 7, 8, 9, 10, how many verses there are right there. All right. I'm going to kind of breeze through a couple of these points real quick because I want to close with the blessings of having integrity in our life. So number 7, there you go. Integrity in the willingness to forgive. Do you feel like it takes integrity to forgive? Or is integrity, in your opinion, is integrity involved in forgiveness?
Certainly takes effort.
Yeah. How can integrity play a role in forgiveness?
You have to lose your own heart, what you feel inside for the wellness of others.
Yeah. It can be easy to want to have a pity party for ourselves and play the victim, right? Sometimes we like to do that. Or sometimes we want to hold a grudge, right? And maybe we can justify that in our minds. We can't do that. We have to be men and women of integrity, right? Put the other person in front of ourselves. See their needs, put their well-being in front of our own.
And that's something, now that you say that, I think that's one of the greatest forms of integrity because you're obviously forgiving them for something they did wrong to you. And so you being willing to put their needs ahead of you after they did wrong to you, I just thought, just randomly just came in. That's probably one of the stronger forms of
Yep.
integrity. Even being hurt, willing to put the
Yep.
person who hurt you in front of yourself.
Yep.
Forgive them.
Yep. Yes.
I think integrity plays a role in forgiveness because you have to truthfully say it out.
Yeah.
That's not always going to come to you.
Yeah.
You because it seems like others.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. We won't get into the passage I was going to look at because I want to cover 2 more points on integrity real quick, and we're getting close to the first bell. What about integrity in our relationships? And I don't just mean like marriage or anything like that, but just like in our dealings with others, how does integrity play a role in that? Yeah.
That shows your true feelings.
Yep. How about loving them when they're not easy to love? Right? I think
Any specifics on that, or?
I've never experienced that, Trace. No, never had to do that.
Or mom, or
Huh?
grandma, or?
Nope. The back row is full of them.
I said uncle first.
Oh, you did? Okay. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Tracy, after class, if you talk about experiences, I can give you examples.
Yes, did you have something? Yeah. Okay. Maybe, are you going like why we want to be friends with that person? Yeah.
Intentions, like, for why you do things.
Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of, sometimes people will, I actually have this on as an example. Let's say somebody has season tickets to the Cardinals, right? I bet they have a lot of friends during baseball season, right? But right now, maybe those people aren't as close to them, right? Because they can't benefit in some way from that friendship. Is that kind of where you're going with it? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Cardinals tickets are fun too. Now he's going home.
So he's a Dodgers fan, for anybody who doesn't know. When we talk about loving them when they're hard to love, that's a good example. Ben, did you have something? I thought I saw your hand. Did you have something?
Well, going back to your last point, the forgiveness, I think that old saying where sometimes you have to be the bigger man
Yep.
comes into play. Like you may not feel like it to forgive someone, but if God is telling you it's the right thing to do, sometimes you just have to take it kind of as a loss. You have to check it up as a loss in a sense, and just forgive. And kind of put it in the past, so to speak, even though you should try to remember it too.
Okay.
But yes, to be the bigger man, I think comes into play.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm sorry, Cindy. Go ahead.
Our relationship's getting a little better, but sometimes we have some hard times, and sometimes, we fight sometimes.
Mm-hmm. But you can still find the good in them, right? You can still find good in them and still hang on with, love them through the hard times, right? Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Real quick, one other one I wanted to hit on before we get to is our speech. Integrity in our speech. Is there integrity in how we speak? Yeah. In what ways? Sometimes it's not just what we say, but it's what we don't say.
Yeah, that's
Right? Go ahead.
I was about to say, as you mentioned it, I was about to say, there's integrity. I was like, I can think of integrity in not speaking.
Yeah.
There's plenty of times where there's things I think I would like to say, but I don't say.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
There's also integrity in how you say it.
Yep. Yes.
There's multiple ways to approach different circumstances and how to do that.
And I think to that point, Joan, that's a good point. I think how we say it is a really good indicator sometimes on our motivations and integrity behind it, right? Right? If I say it sharply, kind of says something about why I'm saying it, right? But if I say it kindly, patiently, and lovingly, totally different. I could say the exact same words. I can't think of an example right now, but I could say the exact same words two different ways and show two different things. That's a good point.
And it's like ESPS, we know people that have high integrity are people that are trusted, and people that are in, a lot of times in leadership roles, or people follow them. It's easy to follow them as a leader because what they say is honest and true, and it's going to happen.
Yep.
Like they say they're not going to do it, they're not going to do it, even if you're not watching.
Yep.
And that's a hard trait. This is probably one of the easiest ways to see the attitudes in my eyes, especially in the season I'm in right now, is seeing it in your children as they grow up and teaching them when you see the attributes not happening, especially integrity. It's easy to follow the rules when dad's there. It's a lot harder to follow the rules when dad's not there, or vice versa, mom. But it's so having that and teaching that in your child helps you better have integrity because you don't want to be a hypocrite, for
Yep.
one. For two, it also it's a constant reminder because you're seeing it in someone else that you are training and them up in the way they should go. And if you're training them up in the way they should go, it's a reminder to you all the time about that attribute. If we truly love them and want them to have that,
Yeah.
then that helps us. And when you talk about speech, it's like if dad says it's going to happen, it's going to happen, unless some unforeseen circumstance that they know about happens and it doesn't happen. But you know, we're honest and true in everything we do, and our speech is our first. You know, a lot of times they see us, but they also see our fruits based on our speech and our actions.
Yeah. Very good.
Kids know.
Yes.
People know.
All right, real quick, there we go. So we've talked a lot about what having integrity looks like. What are some of the blessings we can receive from having this integrity? You would flip over with me to Proverbs 2:7. Proverbs chapter 2:7 says, He being God, stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity. Found it interesting, Solomon, who penned Proverbs, we can read about him having several shields built in 1 Kings 10. So he's not a stranger to a shield, right? But what does a shield do? It's for protection, right? That was a, yes.
Sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
what translation are you looking at?
I am reading out of the New American Standard. What
Okay, that's cool.
translation do you have?
New King James.
What does it say?
It says, he is a shield to those who walk uprightly.
Mhm.
It says he stores up sound wisdom for the upright.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Yep. So the use of shield here to illustrate the protection God gives us is an interesting one to me. I think of several different types of shields we might use at work, right? There's some that are very thin plastic, our riot shields or whatever. It's pretty easy to carry. You can hold it for a long time, but the amount of protection, it's meant to really protect you from items being thrown at you or being spit at or things like that, right? Then we have pretty small, it's basically like a forearm shield. It's a ballistic shield and it would stop around, but not a whole lot. It's basically like a hockey goalie's blocker pad. I don't really trust myself as being that good a goalie, so it's something, but it's not that great. But it's maneuverable. It's easy to move around with. But the one that is pretty comforting to have with you and to be behind is like our 36-inch ballistic shield. But carrying that more than a minute becomes uncomfortable. You do it because it's worth it, but it's over 10 pounds and, holding that out like in front of you can get pretty tiresome. But I think there's a parallel here. The burden of the protection, the more burden it is, the higher protection it offers, right? And I think that correlates here to God's protection for us. The higher price we may pay to demonstrate our integrity towards someone, the greater protection God is going to give us, the greater ability God is going to provide us to accomplish that. Saved by the bell, you guys made it through. No, I appreciate everybody's comments. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.